Hey guys, welcome back to Intelligent Faith 315. Pastor Jay. It's good to have you with us. Today I'd like to cover something a little bit different with you guys. Oftentimes there's kind of a misconception about the person of Jesus. Many people, even Christians a lot of times, assume that the only historical, or I should say maybe the most reliable historical information that exists that really mentions the person Jesus of Nazareth are the historical narratives that we find in the New Testament. Now, of course, those are historical narratives, and actually, if you investigate the principles of what is called historiography, the principles through which secular historians and Christian historians verify the authenticity and the validity and the trustworthiness of ancient documents. Those are called the principles of historiography. If you use those principles and you put the four Gospels and even just the basic manuscripts of the New and Old Testament under those principles to see how they come out, it actually turns out that what we have in the Christian Old and New Testament are some of the best, possibly the best ancient documents that we still have today. And so we'll make some videos about that in future teachings, but just so you understand that, and I really would encourage you to look into that, investigating the Old and New Testament manuscripts under the principles of modern historiography. But as I said, most people, they commonly make this mistake that the only historical documents that refer, or at least accurately or reliably refer to the person Jesus of Nazareth are the Christian, documents, the New Testament, etc. And because of that fact, people kind of have a stigma attached to the New Testament manuscripts, and it shouldn't be like this, but many people have a problem seeing them as ancient historical documents, and they just attach this kind of a religious stigma to them because, of course, it is the foundational literature for the Christian faith, so they have a hard time distinguishing and just realizing that it's also an ancient historical document that should be investigated as such. But anyways, even apart from that, most people, including Christians, but a lot of atheists today, they don't really realize that there's a tremendous amount of historical support from historical sources for the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of historical support from the early church fathers and from Christian sources, and we'll do some teaching on that in the future. But a really interesting group that I've become aware of is the non-Christian, or you could say secular historical information about the existence and the life, the ministry, the death, and even the impact of the person of Jesus. So many of you may not even be aware of this, but there's about 17 or 18 non-Christian or secular historical sources referring to the person of Jesus. So I think we're going to make a couple of short video teachings about this. I'll try to get through as many as I can in this teaching. And just so you understand, there's a great website, and probably I would say the world's foremost expert on this subject. His name is Dr. Gary Habermas. He is the Apologetics and Philosophy Department head at Liberty University. He also has a website. It's GaryHabermas.com. 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 He's got some great MP3s you can download, some great videos, and also some great articles and research papers. And so he is the person who has done this tremendous historical research. I'd encourage you to get any book by Dr. Habermas, The Verdict of History, The Case for the Resurrection. He is, in my opinion, he's really the historical source to go to for the historical information and reliability of the resurrection account of Jesus of Nazareth. Totally apart from Scripture, just really using historical documentation and sources that even atheistic scholars of the New Testament receive. He's developed a method called the minimal facts approach that about using 3 or 4 facts, he can demonstrate with good ease, very efficiently, that the idea that Jesus of Nazareth literally, physically, historically rose from the dead is the best hypothesis that fits the known, accepted historical facts. I'm talking facts accepted by Christian and atheist scholars. So all that to say, check out GaryHabermas.com and the material that I'm going to be sharing in these next couple of videos on the ancient non-Christian sources for the existence and the life of Jesus of Nazareth come directly from Dr. Habermas. I'm literally reading off of an article that he gives for free on his website. It's fantastic information, but since he lives and breathes in the realm of academia, I want to bring some of this stuff down and get it out to you guys at the popular level so you can be exposed to it. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. So kind of as an introduction to this video, what we're going to be looking at over the course of the next couple of videos on this ancient non-Christian historical source information about Jesus, we're going to be primarily looking at historical information in 4 broad categories. We'll look at ancient historians, government sources from the ancient world. We'll also look at Gnostic sources. Gnostics they're an ancient 1st, 2nd century group of really kind of a heretical Christian belief, and well, it's not Christian, it's very just kind of mystical and occultic, but Gnostic historical sources, and then also Jewish historical sources. Out of the ancient historians, I'm going to be reading you guys quotes from Flavius Josephus, he's a Jewish historian, Tacitus, he's a Roman historian, Suetonius was a Roman historian, Julius Africanus, also a Roman historian, and Thallus, who was a Roman historian. So those are mostly from the 1st and 2nd century. One of them is from the 3rd century AD. So very early ancient historical quotes I'll be reading to you guys. The government sources are going to include the Roman Emperor Trajan from some of his own letters, Pliny the Younger, a government official from the 2nd century, Emperor Hadrian himself, another Roman emperor, the Gnostic sources from this very bizarre kind of mystical group. Dave Brown in his books, The Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, he's taken some of their literature and popularized it in his fictional novels. I would emphasize the fictional nature of those novels, very historically inaccurate in many regards. But the Gnostic sources that we'll be quoting in the future: the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Treatise on the Resurrection, the Acts of Pontius Pilate, also known as Acti Pilati, and Phlegon. Okay, those are Gnostic sources all the way up into the 2nd and 3rd century AD. And finally, the Jewish sources that in the future we'll be referring to and quoting from are the Jewish Talmud, which goes from the 1st to the 3rd century AD, and a document called Toledoth Jesu from the 5th century AD. So these are ancient historical documents, historical sources that we'll be quoting from. And as I said, for today, we'll just be focusing on some ancient historians. I'll get through as many as I can in this video. I'm going to be quoting directly from their literature. And again, you can get this information directly from Dr. Habermas's website himself. So first off, I'll be reading to you from Tacitus. Now Tacitus, his full name is Cornelius Tacitus. He lived from 55 to 120 AD. He was a Roman historian who lived through the reigns of over half a dozen Roman emperors. He has been called, quote, the greatest historian of ancient Rome, an individual generally acknowledged among scholars for his moral, quote, integrity and essential goodness. Now, if you go to Borders or to Barnes & Noble or just on Amazon.com, 2 books that would come up if you type in Tacitus's name, the father of modern history, basically, of Roman history. The 2 books that would come up would be the Annals and the Histories. Those are the 2 books. So let me read to you one of Tacitus's reference. Let me read to you this here. The former, in other words, his book called the Annals. The former is thought to have included 18 books, and the latter, which would be the Histories, is thought to have included 12, for a total of 30 books. The Annals cover the period of Caesar Augustus' death in 14 AD until Nero in 68 AD, and his other group, the Histories, begins after Nero's death and goes until Emperor Domitian in 96 AD. Now listen to this. Here's where Tacitus, this basically the father of Roman historical accounts, he's going to get into his references on the person of Jesus of Nazareth, okay? Tacitus recorded at least 1 reference to Christ and 2 to early Christianity, 1 in each of his major works. The most important one is found in the Annals, written about 115 AD, okay? So 115 AD, I'm going to read to you the quote from Tacitus' works. The following was recounted concerning the great fire in Rome during the reign of Nero. Here we go, from Tacitus, quoting from his works, quote, consequently, to get rid of that report, Tacitus tells us, Nero fastened the guilt, that's Caesar Nero, he fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, and then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. They were covered with the skins of beasts. They were torn by dogs and perished, or they were nailed to crosses, or they were doomed to the flames and burned, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. He goes on, he tells us, quote, Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus while he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer or stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme and exemplary punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion. For it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. Unquote. So that's directly from Tacitus from the 1st century AD. And then what kind of historical facts can we now glean from his historical information? Well, from this report we can learn several facts, both explicit and implicit, concerning Christ and the Christians who lived in Rome in the 60s AD. Chronologically, we may ascertain the following information. So listen to this. Number 1, we can learn historically that Christians were named for their founder, Christus. That's the Latin name for Christ. Number 2, Christ was put to death by the Roman procurator Pontius Pilatus. That's also in Latin. Number 3, we can learn that during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, this happened. 4, his death ended the, quote, superstition for a short time. 5, it broke out again. 6, we can learn historically, especially in Judea, this teaching broke out, where the teaching had its origin. 7, we can learn that Christ's followers carried his doctrine to Rome. 8, we can learn historically that when the Great Fire destroyed a large part of the city during the reign of Nero, that's 54 to 68 AD, the emperor placed the blame on the Christians who lived in Rome. 9, Tacitus reports that this group was hated for their abominations. 10, we can learn these Christians were arrested after pleading guilty. 11, and many were convicted for, quote, hatred for mankind. 12, they were mocked. 13, they were then tortured, included being, quote, nailed to crosses, unquote, or burned to death. 14, because of these actions, the people had compassion on the Christians. And 15, we can learn Tacitus therefore concluded that such punishments were not for the public good, but they were simply to, quote, glut one man's cruelty, unquote, obviously referring to Caesar Nero. Dr. Habermas concludes and says, although we must be careful not to press this implication too far, the possibility remains that Tacitus may have indirectly referred to the Christians' belief in Jesus' resurrection, since his teachings, quote, again broke out after his death. I think I'll stop with that. I'll pick up with it next time, but hopefully this will just begin to whet your appetite for the non-Christian historical information about Jesus of Nazareth. You have to realize that when anybody tells you that they doubt sincerely whether Jesus of Nazareth existed as a historical person, they're just really not informed at all. Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, two of the very famous new atheists, they hold to this position. But if we continue to go through this information, as we continue to look at these non-Christian historical sources, you're going to see for yourself that there is no basis in historical research for even imagining that the historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth didn't exist. To the contrary, there's great historical documentation for this man who is the founder and the focus of the Christian faith. So we'll go through this in the future. Until then, have an intelligent faith.